Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
All right, everybody, thanks for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook. Great to have you with us. And on the second half of the program, Alvin and Ray are going to talk to Steve Brawley, who's the founder and the historian for the LGBT History Project. That'll be fascinating just about halfway through this episode. Let's meet our panelists, starting with the news director for the Big 550 KTRS, Wendy Wiese, also the co-host of the Jennifer and Wendy Show. Sitting in for Bill McClellan, who's taken the week off, we welcome from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Mr. Joe Holleman. From rawstory.com, the Riverfront Times, and his own program on 550 AM, Mr. Ray Hartmann. And we welcome from the St. Louis American, Alvin Reid, the pride of Kirkwood, who will kick off this program as we take a look at the sentencing and the time served by the former county executive, Steve Stenger, who, as you know, was found guilty of theft of honest services. It was a pay-to-play sort of deal where he was giving government contracts in exchange for campaign donations, Alvin, and he was sentenced to almost 4 years in jail. Well, he went to jail in September of 2019. Now he's out. We understand he's living in house arrest in his own home somewhere in the greater St. Louis area. So that's less than half the time served, although he'll get out of house arrest in late December. Nonetheless, what kind of a signal is that when the white-collar criminals are serving fully half of the time that they were sentenced to?
Well, never mind the white-collar criminal. This is political corruption. So thus, you didn't rip off a business, a company, individual investors. You stole from more than 1 million people. And if you steal from that many people, I think the punishment that you're given is the punishment you should serve. That way, you'll at least get politicians to think twice, maybe before they just steal and just go buck wild. I don't want anybody to go to prison, okay, before they have done something that sends them there. But once they get sent there, okay, I start losing, like my patience with why aren't they still in there, okay? And there's no justification, I think, for the former county executive to be just out. I don't care where he lives at. I don't care how much his house costs. It's just, why is he out?
It's defeating and it's deflating. And as Rita Hurd Days said of the St. Louis County Council said the other night on St. Louis in the Know with Ray, that it's such a great illustration of the sentencing inequities and how unfair it is for people to look at somebody like Steve Stenger, who, as Alvin accurately, is describing, the damage that he did to the public trust was serious. Really serious. And so to think of him out in less than half the time sentenced is also serious and awful.
I only disagree with the councilwoman in that I think there is a consistency in the fact that pretty much every corrupt politician who goes to jail gets let out early. So I think it's fairly consistent, that they get cut loose. I guess you just have to live with the fact that he's always going to be down as the farmer felon, Steve Stenger. I mean, ruined a career, what have you. There's just so many people who get let out early on a lot of charges, criminal, corruption, whatever, that I think shouldn't. But then again, where do you draw the line at it? Are you a danger to society, so on and so forth? I mean, everybody knows what Steve Stenger is, and he's like every other crooked politician.
He seems so unapologetic. He seemed so unapologetic.
I have a different view of it. I think I was surprised that he only got 46 months. And I think you can argue that he should have gotten Scott Rosenblum did a very good job for him in that respect. As far as his release, he didn't release himself, obviously, and he also didn't write the rules, which the rules provide for, and they're not irrational, for people to be incentivized for good behavior to get out early. And that makes sense if you're running a prison system and the federal system. And they also provide for people getting out early for drug rehabilitation. And again, you could argue whether he should have qualified for it, whatever, but those are not unreasonable rules. And I don't think in particularly with COVID, a lot of people have been getting out earlier across the spectrum because of that. So, I think the argument about him getting out too early is I think Ritta's argument is great about the systemic injustice of how people are. But the idea of him getting out too early is really just the system we have.
I would say change the system through legislation. I don't think that people should get out that early. That's my opinion. But also, during COVID, what we found, Ray, Tom Sullivan, the government watchdog, has shown that a lot of people are spending a year, 2 years, 3 years in jail awaiting their trials. They're spending more time waiting for trials in our area. One guy in the county has been in the jail for 5 years waiting. And
that's the kind of stuff Ritta's talking about, and she's right.
I'll tell you what, it's not right when a guy is convicted and he's spending less time in jail than the people who haven't even gone to trial yet.
Well, and again, it's got to do with wealth and your representation. But the point is that within the context of federal prisoners, he received what they receive. And it's
Speaking of coming and going, Wendy Wiese, Nicole Galloway, the only Democrat to have statewide office, of course, she's the auditor, has announced that she's not running for re-election. She's going to spend more time with her family. What was your reaction to that, Wendy?
I thought that was as legitimate a reason as we've heard, because in this particular case, when a woman says, I've missed countless family events, I've missed countless Little League games, my husband and my 3 kids have been very patient about this since I was appointed by then Governor Nixon after the untimely death of Tom Schweik in 2015, then I say I applaud her and I wish her well. And all of this, the political hand-wringing about how, she's the only Democratic state office holder, that's not on her. The party will find someone to work in there, but I wish her well.
And she was a really good auditor. You don't hear many Republicans even, not in the context of some politics. She's not somebody that the Republicans mess with very often in the context of her audits. She's really respected across the aisle. I think she's done well. Nothing is forever. She might come back to the political scene, but I think I think she would have won re-election. I do in 2020.
Yeah.
But which isn't a certainty, because this is normally the off year is not good for the party in power nationally. So while it is in power in Missouri, I just think
for auditor, she would have been
I take her to word on this. I do.
Okay, Ray, what about Vicky Hartzler, who has thrown her hat in the ring, or her bonnet, or whatever you would call it, to run for U.S. Senate? As we know, the senior senator from the state of Missouri, Roy Blunt, is stepping down. So now we've got Mark McCloskey, the St. Louis attorney, Eric Greitens, the former governor, Eric Schmidt, the attorney general for the state, and Vicky Hartzler. With her announcement, who wins, who loses with that?
Well, the conventional wisdom is the more candidates, the better for Greitens, because he's got the kind of QAnon base locked up, okay? But Vicky Hartzler is underestimated on this half of the state. And I don't just say that just because she's a fellow Mizzou grad, okay? She is a very conservative, very right-wing congresswoman, but she has a lot of presence in the Columbia and the Kansas City media markets in particular because of the nature of her district. And I would say that much like I know Ann Wagner's been looking at this race, she's got a free look at it. It's if I could use a sports analogy, it's like when somebody jumps off sides in a football game, you got what they call a free play. This is a free look for any member of Congress. Jason Smith in Southeast Missouri and what's it in Southwest, the congressman, both Billy Long, both are looking at it, have gone to Mar-a-Lago. Everybody gets a free look because any money they raise, they can pivot to using it for a re-election next year. I wouldn't rule her out. If it wasn't going to be Greitens, I would argue she has as good a chance as any of the challengers to win that.
I think go ahead.
Go ahead, Alvin. Go ahead.
I was going to say, okay, what can she play? One, she could play the St. Louis card. That's a clown show in St. Louis. McCloskey, Greitens, Eric Schmidt, that's clown show, okay? I'm talking about some serious down-home Republican politics on this side of the state. I called Billy Long Huey Long the other day on a show I was on. Okay, I don't think he's that bad, but who is he? Now, she's got half the state in her pocket while I think we're fighting over votes in the largest metropolitan area on this side. I think she's got a very good chance. She also has across the border money, okay, which none of these folks on this side have. Nothing's coming from Illinois, but people from Missouri live on that it's very affluent over there in Overland Park and all those places. There's a lot of money coming back to her for people that don't even live in the state.
Well, I thought it was really interesting and very telling that the first thing she did was invoke the name of the titular head of the GOP and talked about President Trump. And if people are tired of President Trump's, the shadowy presence in the distance, it doesn't look like it's going to dissipate anytime soon because that's the first thing she did.
Joe, let me ask you about
interesting, but I still think that Eric Schmidt is the favorite.
Eric Schmidt or Eric Greitens?
Eric Schmidt.
Really?
Yeah, I think there are some things. I don't say that Greitens is not a viable candidate, but I think he also clearly, as we've reported, has some baggage. Eric Schmidt also statewide, name recognition. I think sometimes that we think that everybody pays as much attention to politics as we do, and they don't. I can guarantee you that over the years of being a reporter, and they're going to go, yeah, Eric Schmidt, Attorney General. I still put him as the favorite. Now, could any one of the three people, Greitens or Hartzler or Schmidt, win? Absolutely. But right now, if you had me rank the field, I'd put Schmidt at number one.
Okay, Joe, I want to ask you.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say we really should move along because of time. But Joe, speaking of Congress women, and we were with Vicky Hartzler, Cori Bush, I think is kind of getting a pass because she's doing something that's completely unprecedented, but not getting a whole lot of attention for it. She's voting against military contracts, not only in the St. Louis area, but in her own district. For example, the delegation from Missouri, everyone, even Emmanuel Cleaver and both U.S. senators voted to send a letter to Boeing to say, hey, or rather to the Navy saying, you've got to continue to order these FA-18 Hornets, which happened to be made in North County in Cori Bush's district. And she was the only person who didn't sign that letter asking the Navy to keep that production line going. Sam Page said that's 16,000 jobs at stake. And then she actually voted against the Joint Direct Attack Munitions, the JDAM. It's a weapon that's being sold to Israel. It's made in St. Charles. And she signed a letter with other members of the squad saying she doesn't want the Boeing production to be sending that out to Israel, which I've never seen anything quite like this. Is she principled or is she a little crazy, or just how would you describe this?
I'm going to say that she's neither. And take that as the compliment or insult that anybody wants to. I think she's just decided to align herself, and you mentioned it, with the squad. And it was a squad position. And I don't necessarily have a problem with a politician voting against something because they believe that is indeed what is the best thing for the people they represent. But the two things that I've heard from Ms. Bush since she's been in the office is that we need less police officers. Money invested in policing is never a good idea, believe what she said. And she's against jobs in her district. I'm curious as to the people who elected her, is that really what you envision that district to be? That district needs less police and needs less jobs? I don't think it is. Well, I think if you actually talk to people, they wouldn't agree. But I think when you have someone who got elected, it seems clear to me that the thing that she is taking the most pride in is being a member of the squad, and this is what the squad wants to do. And I think that's where you have it. We'll see in 2 years how well that plays out. Should those jobs disappear? Should the police quit showing up? We'll see where it goes.
I disagree with Joe. And let me say this. First of all, crazy is ridiculous. This is her philosophy. She believes, and I disagree with Joe. Oh, wait, first of all, I'll say I don't agree with her decision about Israel. I think that's not, I disagree with it substantively. But here's the deal. She didn't decide to align herself with the squad. It's what she believes. She has very similar beliefs to AOC and some of the others in the squad. That's different. When you say she's trying to deny, it's sort of like she's affected here. This is what she believes.
And you speak of this from what expertise that you have sat down and had in-depth
numbers,
Ray. She simply embraced the squad's
Joe,
theory.
can I finish?
There's strength in numbers.
To the point that Joe made, I think that she ran very clearly on police reform. I don't think that necessarily means that you're always against all policing, but she definitely ran on that. To say that she's against jobs, I actually like the fact that a congressperson is willing to call them as they see them. When they don't, and particularly when it's another district, there's a word we have for it. It's pork. We always accuse the congressmen in other districts of being, advocates of pork and have no principle. All they care about is their jobs. They'd be for Al-Qaeda if it brought jobs in their district. So I don't think it's a crime for her to stand up for what she thinks. And I happen to agree with the general feeling that we are spending way too much of our military resources on fighting the last war, and not nearly enough on cybersecurity, which is what we really need to be focused on. So
enough to say goodbye to thousands and thousands of jobs.
I bet the jobs aren't going anywhere, and they're not paying any attention to Cori Bush. Cori Bush also wants to democratize the utility companies, and I heard Ameren lose their mind and saying they're gonna leave St. Louis because of Cori Bush. There's only so much, just you could pay attention to it, but all this drastic action over this vote, that's nonsense. And I will throw in too, Ann Wagner represents me. Now, she may not be any part of any squad or this or philosophical, but she makes all kind of votes that I guarantee you 45% of the people, more than that, in her district disagree with 1,000%. But we're not going to say that, she doesn't represent us or,
I think 45% is too low if you ask the people in the first district if they thought they needed more police or not, or more jobs or not. I think it's higher than 45%.
I'm just talking about the things she votes on that we disagree with who did not vote for her. She didn't win 55-45. It was less than that.
I do wonder, though, has any congresswoman,
I got it.
Has any member of Congress ever voted against a weapon or a military project in his or her own district in the history of the United States?
I mentioned there's Charlie. I'm not sure of this.
I've never seen it.
Let me finish, Charlie. If you want to make like a huge bet on that's in like triple figures over the last 100 years, I'll take that bet. So don't walk down that road, because I guarantee you.
How about a sandwich at Nathaniel Reid in Kirkwood?
That's fine.
Okay, so Alvin, I'm going to move to you, Alvin, on the next topic, which is Todd Roberson is the editorial page editor, Alvin, of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. He announced in his column this week in a story that he wrote that his wife has taken a job in the arts in Hartford, Connecticut, and so he's going to have an apartment here in town. He'll spend 50% of his time here in St. Louis, 50% in Hartford. We are in the age of telecommuting and working virtually. Everyone's doing that. Can an editorial page editor of the city's largest newspaper do that?
Absolutely not. And I think that this is not just on him, but hey, if you can't be bothered with St. Louis, why does St. Louis have to be bothered with you? I think this is ridiculous, okay? And two, I would like to approach my wife and say like, hey, I got an apartment back in St. Louis and I'm gonna live with you some of the time and I'm gonna be back in St. Louis some of the time. And she look at me and say like, no, you ain't. So I just, no, no. Move on. Get a job in Hartford. Get a job in ESPN, that's right down the road in Bristol. Get a job someplace else and move on. Because, look, people think you got vendettas against people, the mayor, all right? And so now you're going to play this out where you're not even living in St. Louis. You're going to be comedy directing the editorial page of a fine newspaper, and you're not living in St. Louis? Bye. Good riddance. Sayonara.
I have a big problem with the St. Louis 50% here. But that's just my.
I don't think Todd and his wife care.
I think he should get I think
that's true.
should hire him or whatever's up there now. I'm sorry, but Alvin's right. And I remember when Brian Hall, I feel like giving him the Brian Hall Civic Achievement Award for when he spent it. Now he's moved here, I believe, but he had like a decade where he was promoting how great St. Louis was. And he was writing his comments on the way home to Baltimore on Southwest Airlines.
But I mean, it works. Doesn't it work?
Bill McClellan wrote some great stuff about that because it doesn't really make us look that great that the people, like in this case, like Alan says, the guy that's telling us all how to live in St. Louis isn't even living here. I mean,
but aren't you guys you're all 20th century. This is the 21st century. And after COVID, we know that people, first of all, people have been working from afar for a long time. Elaine Beats, living in Florida.
This job.
We had Robert Shapiro, who is the CEO of Monsanto, lived in Chicago. Ron Shake, the CEO of Panera, based in Sunset Hill. He's in Brookline, Massachusetts. That's how things work.
No, that's not how things work for certain positions. And that's one,
Selling St. Louis, and by the way, I'll fully admit that if he didn't have the kind of editorial position, including this incredible vendetta, I don't think I've ever seen a worse personal vendetta that the Post has that it does against Tashara Jones, going back to her days as treasurer. And I'm definitely biased. I don't question.
I personally, as an employee of that company, I don't see why you guys are making such a big deal about it. For years, readers and a lot of ex-readers have made the point that the Post-Dispatch editorial page sounds like something that's written by liberals on the East Coast. There we go. There you have it. See what y'all are upset about. I honestly don't.
Well, I think it's interesting that all of you feminists on the panel are decrying this decision on the part of the couple. I say good for them, and I think it's going to be fine if the Post.
Can I jump in real fast?
Yes. I'm for him moving to Hartford because his wife's position should come first. I'm not arguing against that. I just say he shouldn't be telling people how to live in St. Louis while he's living in Hartford. That's all.
Okay,
real quick, I'm going to say that, and I'll take this back to Nicole Holloway. We made decisions to go into the profession we did. Now, at one point, I traveled more. Okay, once I was the Sunday editor. I worked every Sunday. I worked on Christmas Day. We have all worked on holidays because we chose the profession that we went into. Okay, it does not change that there's a now digital age and all that. We wanted to do what we wanted to do where we lived at.
It actually does. It
doesn't. It doesn't.
Because I think that you can write your column from anywhere, Alvin, knowing what you
But
know.
I can't run a newspaper. I can't run a newsroom. I can't be in charge of the editorial page, live in any place else other than the town that I am covering. I am sorry, you just can't do it.
Alvin in radio, isn't it true, Wendy, that Frank Opinion did his show from Palm
California.
Springs? California. No one knew.
Yep.
In fact, for all we know, Todd Roberson's writing a lot of his columns out of Hartford now. We wouldn't even know. We wouldn't
He's
know.
the boss of the editorial page, and the boss should be in town.
Okay. How about you, Joe? Speaking of where people should sleep, Jeff Carson, the interim jail commissioner in St. Louis, says that while the mayor is moving inmates or residents from the city's workhouse to the city's justice center downtown in St. Louis, that they don't have enough room. They don't have enough mattresses. So these guys, and maybe gals, are sleeping on the floor or they're sleeping on benches. But they do have showers. So there's good news there. What do you make of this, where the mayor is moving people out of the workhouse where they have beds to the justice center where they sleep on the floor?
I think it is a wonderful return to old school politics, where you look down the checklist of things that you promised to do when you were campaigning, and you decide you need to do at least one of those things. To heck with the consequences, to heck whether it's well planned or how it could be executed, just do it, and then we'll fix it later. But when the time comes for re-election, you say, remember how I said I'd close the workhouse? I closed the workhouse. So if they have to sleep on the floor, if the locks don't work, none of that matters. This is all about
there's that
fulfilling
post-dispatch
that one
vendetta
little
against the
idea.
mayor.
And
Oh,
then
no,
you're gonna say,
wait,
this
the
is
locks
about
didn't work before she was the
justice,
mayor.
and
Okay.
I kept my promise.
All right. The locks didn't work long before she was the mayor. So, don't heap that on her.
It's keeping a campaign promise that makes no sense at all. There's no magic in 100 days, Alvin.
Lay on the
Do
right.
it right. Do it right.
You don't care what happens to them inmates other than what people don't care what happens to those inmates other than how it plays politically. So they got to sleep on the floor. Okay. The day will come they won't sleep on the floor. Joe, you want to sleep in the Radisson, the Ritz-Carlton?
So your position is it's okay to mistreat the prisoners as long as she can okay her campaign promise.
I don't say I don't think I put it in being mistreated. You don't have to sleep in your cell. You can sleep out here in an open area. I might opt for that.
Or you could do it logically and orderly with a plan.
Or I cannot go to jail in the first place. How about that? How about that? How about
Alvin,
I don't go to jail?
They're accused of crimes,
Okay.
Alvin. They're not convicted yet.
Okay, you're right. I stand corrected. Charlie, you're right.
First of all, I think the pledge she made, close the workhouse, was the correct one. I think it needs to happen, and it was the right one.
But even if the timing is wrong, Ray?
Even though it's in better condition than the city jail?
We don't know that. I ain't been there.
I've been there.
So you know, huh? Charlie? All right, okay.
I got
You need to live there.
photos. I'll share photos with you. We'll have that sandwich.
Oh, yes,
Have,
right.
Nathaniel Reid, and we'll look at the photos of the
You'll be buying me a sandwich, and then we'll look at that movie Brubaker with Robert Redford where he
Get out your wallet, Reid. You're going to owe me.
Charlie, I
We
think
got 10 seconds, Ray.
decision was right, and this is a temporary issue that a year from now nobody will remember. It's a temporary, short-run inconvenience. It's a bad situation, but it's temporary.
Okay, Ray, hold your fire, because in a moment you'll be posing questions to Steve Brawley, who's the founder and historian for the LGBT History Project in St. Louis. That's on Next Up. The rest of you, Joe, thank you very much for sitting in for Bill. He returns next week. Everybody, thanks so much for joining us. Don't touch that dial.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Welcome back. Ray Hartman, Alvin Reid. We're joined by Stephen Brawley, a historian for the LGBT Project. We're coming up on it. We are actually in Pride Month. And Stephen, welcome aboard. We're getting all new to this with just the two of us, so it's fun. We always have a great time. So anyway, explain to us what's going on this month. And I will tell you that, like when I signed on earlier today, one of the things that popped up on like my Yahoo screen is that they're going to be posting things throughout the United States, live events, digital events throughout all of the, these next couple of weekends and all the months. So this is a big month, for the community. And just explain kind of what's going to be going on.
Sure. Because of the pandemic, the last 2 years, the Pride events across St. Louis are a little different. Things have adjusted. There's a lot of events postponed, some canceled. So things that have happened last weekend, there was something called a caravan, where there was a car rally throughout St. Louis, and people had decorated their cars and had floats. The mayor and Representative Cori Bush were in the parade. And so that was an adjustment, because normally there's big Pride festivals. St. Louis has around maybe one of the largest network of Pride festivals in the nation. We have 6 independent Pride festivals, the traditional one downtown, St. Charles, Alton, Metro East, Black Pride, Trans March. We've had lots of things over the years. So this year things are different. Things are, like I said, moving targets, but Pride still goes on. A lot of people are participating in different ways, virtually or some scaled down events.
Stephen, as a historian, how much have you feel? I'm not sure quite how far back you go. Nobody goes back as far as I do. But uh, how do you see the progress or the change that has been made with regard to the general public's attitudes toward the LGBT community in, say, the past decade, 20 years?
Sure. Yeah, right. Just going back to, St. Louis's founding in the 1760s, where it was illegal and, of course, you would be, stoned to death. So now, of course, things are a little different. With the advance of things like, gay marriage, and that a lot of people took a breath like, oh, okay, things are okay now. But of course, we know they're not. Missouri has discrimination laws that don't protect people from housing discrimination, job discrimination for sexual orientation. So that's still a fight with the state legislature ongoing. Have things improved? Absolutely. Things are, I always say that we stand on each other's shoulders. So, there are a lot of younger folks who are standing on my shoulder who are going to benefit from the things I've done, and I'm benefiting from things that my elders have done. So while things are better, there's still so much to do. There's still a lot happening, especially with in the trans community, so much that's still being waged, that war that's being waged. So there's just a lot to do still.
Well, we're talking about history, and the previous administration was in for 4 years. Over that 4 years, did progress halt? Did progress regress? How damaging was that to the LGBT community?
Well, it was both a moral setback as well as, a setback, especially the Trump administration's war against the trans community, especially with the military. There were, of course, he didn't do the proclamations and the things that Biden is doing or Obama did, and that's been revived. But yeah, it was a setback. But I think coming off the heels of gay marriage and the success of that, I think Biden, of course, is making a lot of symbolic. And I think he also, I don't have all the details, but remember, I think he rescinded the trans rules that Trump had put in place. So was it damaging? Yes. I think you continue to see polls nationally that show, and I don't know, the latest one the other day showing, support for the LGBTQI community and same-sex marriage, higher and higher. So it's not like Trump dented into that support. So while we have to be cautiously optimistic, there's still so much to do. As I said, with Missouri still has lots of things that need to be done, especially in supporting our trans brothers and sisters, to making sure that it used to be, the whole God, guns, and gays thing with the Republican Party using that mantra, and now they use the trans issues with the bathroom bills a couple years back. Now they're doing youth sports. So it's all politics. It's all a culture war. And we just have to be aware of it.
But Stephen, talk about that culture war in St. Louis, because we know Missouri actually didn't go quite as far as some other states that actually, like Arkansas, was worse than others that with regard to trans people in terms of medical issues for kids under 18 and so forth. And treatment, and treatment's not the right word. What am I looking for? But the idea that someone who is trans can be themselves is very much challenged, not just by Trump, but by the entire Republican Party at the moment. So is St. Louis, which is not quite as much Republican as maybe the rest of Missouri, what are trans people in your mind feeling here about public opinion and policy?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. Again, things have changed and come a long way. St. Louis has a long history, especially with WashU doing gender-affirming surgeries back in the 70s. So St. Louis was a really well-known place for people to have what people used to call sexual reassignment, sex changes operations. But yeah, we still hear lots of stories of issues with the police dealing with the trans community, especially misgendering people, and we've heard a lot of that over the even recently. And so there's a real sensitivity to in the LGBTQI community in St. Louis for us to be looking how can we support the trans community. So it's still like I said, I keep saying over and over, there's still so much to do and so much awareness to build, especially with even in the LGBTQI community, not even understanding as a white male, me understanding. I have a lot of friends, trans friends, but I can't relate to them because I can't put myself, in their position, but I can hopefully be an ally and be empathetic and helpful.
Yeah, I want to emphasize, if I follow up, first of all, gender affirming surgery was what I was awkwardly grasping for as praise. I think people underestimate. Tell us about the fact that the LGBT community is not monolithic, and it's just to ask you, as a gay man, I think people make a mistake of lumping together people in that community. Talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Especially as a historian here in St. Louis and understanding the history of people of color in St. Louis, the African American history is something we are continuing to work toward to figure out how do we. We're working on some great ideas and some fun projects, so I can talk about that later. But how do we tell stories? But how do we let people tell their own stories? And that's really what I'm about: is how can we allow and find ways for the African American people who have stories and legacies in the community, the trans community, the bisexual community. I mean, there's all the alphabet that continues to evolve. So there's lots of voices, lots of folks who have been marginalized for centuries, and now that the world is such a vibrant place of communication with so many ways for people to get out there and tell their stories and to be heard. Again, we're not a monolith. It's a struggle. One of the reasons people say there's going to be a lot of prides in St. Louis is because, it's hard to have a singular pride that addresses and voices concerns of everyone. I think all the pride groups in St. Louis work toward that goal. But when you have people, who happen to live in St. Charles who don't want to go downtown, or people on the east side who want to stay on the east side for their festival, I think there's room for everyone. But I think that there needs to be a good ongoing discussion about how can the entire community understand each other better, but yet have respect and admiration for each other's individuality. So it's tough.
Just going off what you said, Ray, I actually know, I know a gay man who is a Trump supporter. I mean, to this day, I'm not talking about, like during his administration, it goes on now. So, it's not a monolithic community. Steve, you mentioned the police. Some of the pride parades throughout the United States do not want uniformed police officers there. And we're not having one this year, but as far as the pride parade here, is that something you would support, or just what are your feelings on that?
Sure. Well, as a historian, it's my job to document and report, not to have necessary opinions. I can tell you what's happened, which is, we've had issues in past prides where, especially the trans community felt uncomfortable with the police there. And there was a big, I will call it a scandal about it, where the trans community ended up having their own event, their own first ever trans march, which they felt they wanted to have their own event so they could feel respected and safe. St. Louis has a complicated history back. I believe it was dating back into the 50s. I have records of the police having, using Bible quotes in their training, so that really were homophobic and that sort of thing. We have lots of instances where St. Louis had a masquerading law up until 1984 where you couldn't dress as a member of the opposite sex. So people were arrested for decades in St. Louis for masquerading, and that was a way for the police to really harass the gay community. So there's a real negative history there, and we're far from past it. There's been positive movement, but there's a lot of work to do.
Stephen, has your work studied the state of Missouri with regard to this, or more in St. Louis?
Well, our project here on the St. Louis LGBT History Project is local, but I have two sister organizations. We have a gay history project in Kansas City, GLAMA, and we have a gay and lesbian history project down in Springfield at the Missouri State. I think that's what they call it now, Missouri State. So people are surprised that Missouri has three very independent but very we like to work together, and we're supportive of each other. And I'm also a trustee of the State Historical Society of Missouri. As far as I know, the first openly gay person on that board. And so there are efforts to look at the state as well as regional activities.
Well, the reason I ask that is I don't know how, again, respect that you're a historian, so I want to ask you about this. As recently as the late 1970s, with taxpayer dollars, our state argued against allowing what we called at the time gay lib recognition at the University of Missouri Columbia, which and it meant no more. I assume you're familiar. Maybe you can elucidate, but as I remember, it meant no more than simply allowing gays and lesbians to meet on campus to discuss issues. There was no funding, there was no nothing. It was just, can you meet on? And their argument was that homosexuality was an illness, and that the people would spread it. They actually argued that in court, that it could be proselytized, and that in fact people could get it. Do you have stories like that to tell? That wasn't Saturday. It's in my lifetime. Are there a lot of stories that people don't know like that?
Oh yeah, I mean our history books, that are very incomplete. You go to the newspaper archives and you see, it's when you study this history, you have to unfortunately, type in terms like pansy and pervert and sodomy. You have to type in all those words to try to glean some glimpse of what history might tell us. But yes, that case, there was there's several cases where a professor might be gay, and there was uproars over that. So yeah, there's more than I could mention here, but yeah, I mean, it's going on today somewhere, somehow. It's that's being that message is being propagated.
Along those lines, we could go to places in Missouri, places all over the United States, and you'll ask about a gay community, and people in that town will say, like, well, we don't have any gay people here. And that's today. Now, whether it's fear or that keeps them to themselves, how do you respond to that in this day and age? And you're not in a position to just throw your hands up, okay? So how do you respond to that?
Well, I actually have responded this way to several friends and family. These are the same folks in rural areas who say all the people on welfare live in the city. Mm-hmm. It's the same issue. It's the issue of urban rural, of it's the city that's full of sin, and the city that's full of the queers. It's the city that is the draining of the tax dollars with welfare and job, all that. And if you look at the numbers, it's very clear that, some of the very poorest parts of the state are all very, very rural. And there's lots of folks who are suffering. A lot of them are on support and food support, housing support, you name the support. But my point is, it's just an easy blanket political, again, culture, divide issue that's been used since the Reagan years very effectively. And now that we're a little bit more, I think the gay LGBTQI community has mobilized well and learned a lot from Stonewall from the 70s to how to counter these issues and get into the political realm and fight it. But definitely that rural, the LGBTQI community has the same issue in Missouri as almost any other political issue when it comes to the red state in the red parts of the states and the blue parts of the states. But there are lots of LGBTQI citizenry throughout the state in the most rural of areas as well as the big cities.
I'm going to follow up on that because I would imagine that I graduated high school in 1978, and I would imagine while in high school, years right afterwards, the percentage of gay individuals I knew is probably the exact same as it would be, now. But at that time, especially, young people, that was the generations that weren't gay. Well, now they've come out, and we know that this is there, over the years. How do you see that, like if you look through history, you just don't read a lot or see a lot about high school kids and early college kids, declaring their lifestyle. So that's I guess a historic measure. Could you put it like that?
Well, in 2 weeks, I'm having a high school reunion with our LGBTQIA folks. I think there's 5 or 6. Shout out to Hazelwood West, class of '83.
Okay.
8 of us who are going to get together. They're coming in from across America. Several are going to be in town. So, but now, did we know at the time? We didn't know at the time. We were, what our sexuality was, or talked about it with each other. It wasn't. But over the, the last X years, we figured that out, and we know each other now. But no, you're right. I think those numbers are probably the same. It's just that I think there are students who are much more open about it than there would have been back in our day. But I still think there's a lot of closeted kids, and they're probably closeted for the same reasons, because they're afraid of telling their parents, they're afraid of, being discriminated against or made fun of or beat up or whatever. So,
Stephen, talk about what your role as a historian is in trying to impact education with regard to LGBT people. Because, I tell you, not related to this, but in the last month, it was like on a different topic. I realized I never was taught about the Tulsa massacre at all, which was
right.
It didn't come up. You think about that, is an entire one of the worst chapters in American history didn't even come up. And I would imagine for LGBT people, not making an analogy particularly, but just talking about in the world of LGBT people, I'm guessing there are large chunks of our history that have just been, I don't know, de-Stalinized, what do you want to call it? It's just vaporized. I'm curious how you view that as a role that you might have.
Sure. Most gay history is Stonewall, Harvey Milk. Those are 2 biggies. Otherwise, there might be some folks who know about some other aspects, but it's sort of that history between the coast of, you have what happens in San Francisco, New York, and the rest of the flyover of America. That history's lost. So that's one of the things I work on with other projects and other parts of America that live between those coasts, to try to make sure that's told. So there is a large effort, as just as in we've heard on the issue of critical race theory, the 1619 project of oh no, you ain't got to do that. And so it would be the same way if you wanted to do LGBTQIA curriculum. I know Illinois, I believe, has I think come forward there, but I can't imagine Missouri is going to be a fan of that discussion. So yeah, that's going to be, I think, important as a historian to find other ways to communicate. So that's why my work with the History Project is a partnership model, working with the Missouri History Museum, the State Historical Society at UMSL, WashU, the Griot Museum of Black History. Those folks are professional historians. They have artifacts, they have museums. So my partnership model, we're all working together to do innovative community projects. The History Museum is launching a Gateway to Pride initiative. They have a really cool online exhibit you can go look at. WashU has a great online map of gay history, which is cool to look at. So there's a lot of activities going on that are helping educate the public. But one of my goals is to be a Pied Piper and champion of all these things happening in St. Louis, to make the public aware. There's research to learn. So,
I'm sorry. So, go ahead, Ray.
I was just filling time.
No, I was just going to say, when you were talking about the history, is it okay with African American history, Black history? It has always, been noted like, hey, America doesn't recognize, Black people that did great things, 1800s, going way back. Is there a timeline like that you now show not just gay people, but the whole world, that these people were gay? Never mind that. This is what they accomplished. Do you try to do that also?
Yeah, sure. I think there are lots of folks nationally, but even locally. One example that comes to mind, just because it's being worked on now, is Helen Stevens, the Olympian, who was a lesbian. Obviously, a lot of folks, don't really, I don't think, care either way, but there are probably folks who are like, well, let's not talk about that aspect of her life. Let's just talk about the winning the Olympics, but let's don't mention she was a lesbian. But now there's lots of, there's a documentary coming out. There's been some books written. There's some lots of information about people who knew Helen and her life who are going to be coming forward and tell that story. But that's just one example of kind of that whitewashing of let's just keep that out of the narrative. And so I think there's going to be a lot of that moving forward in the next, few years as we learn more about folks and their lives. Langston Hughes from Missouri comes to mind, and others who, some people obviously in the LGBTQIA community, that rolls hard sometimes to keep up. It's hard for the gay community to even to learn that history, let alone communicating it to a broader audience. But I think there's a whole lot of history out there to come, and I think I'm excited about the potential of it.
There are 5, I believe, and I'm always kind of amused at this expression, openly gay members of the Missouri legislature now. And I don't know, again, as a historian, we don't keep track of how many actually LGBT people there are, just openly is, it's like whatever. But the point is, are there in your work, will we be learning about St. Louisans who were members of the LGBT community when there was no actual open community at some point? Do you think, are there a lot of people that will learn sometime, not that it really should matter, that we didn't know were LGBT without necessarily outing people that don't wish to have their information discussed?
That's the tough one. I kind of call it historical outing, because there are several famous St. Louisans who are rumored to may have been gay, lesbian, and of course we don't have any way to say whether that's one way or the other. So there's lots of innuendo and jokes about it. It's like, oh yeah, so and so was or wasn't. I would hope that with the advent of people wanting to, and I have a lot of friends who are older. They said they might want to do an oral history, but they don't want it released until they're dead or after they pass. So you respect that and you understand people's privacy. But yeah, it's a mixed bag. I think going back and without some hard evidence of a journal or photos of which they said very explicitly, I think that gray area is always going to be problematic, because unless you can use some sort of measure of respectable research, you're not going to be able to be firm about that.
I guess I'm curious, because you want to walk a line that I would think would be difficult. They're respecting, again, someone's sexual orientation is nobody's business unless they want it to be. But at the same time, if we don't know that, I think it's helpful to people to have some context that many people whose sexuality was LGBTQ, whatever, so I guess it's a balancing act, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, there's like I said, I'm hoping that because the more education we do, is that folks will be willing to come forward and say, yeah, I would like my story told, and let's tell it. So we're just hoping that the more we can reach people and communicate the need for it, then the more we can get done.
Steve, is our state's attitude toward the gay community, they would never believe it, but does it cost us in economic development? Does it cost us in the eyes of the nation when corporations and places are looking to expand and they just say, like, we're not doing that?
Yeah, the state overall for sure. I mean, I think I'm sure there's some polls or numbers that I can't quote that show Missouri's not at the top of that, but places like St. Louis might be higher in those rankings, of course. But yeah, so you look at the brain drain, the talent drain of the folks who said, I ain't gonna live here. And so we have famous actors. I mean, we have a famous actor, Michael Kearns, who was from the St. Louis area and moved to LA at a young age and is an actor. And there are countless numbers of people who fled and are never coming back. There's a few examples I hear of people who come back, but yeah, I think it does damage the state economically. Places like St. Louis, Kansas City, and Columbia seem to have favorable environments, but the state overall, it is damaging.
Ray, you want to take the last one, man?
There you go. Well, how much time we got left?
We got about like a minute or two.
So, what do you see future historians of 50 years, 100 years, looking at in their work, standing on your shoulders, Stephen Brawley, what do you predict they'll be talking about our town?
I think, our town, our time, I think that, we're still in that mix, bag of transition of some victories and then some setbacks and struggles. So I think it's one of those moments of persisting and continuing with fighting against some of the discriminatory laws at the state level and a lot of the issues that are being waged against the trans community. I think it's going to be, I see us a few decades away from being comfortable if we have a successful effort in the next couple of decades of pursuing having a better life for the LGBTQI community. I think there's still lots of laws to fix, lots of minds to change, lots of hearts to change. So I wish it was sooner. Maybe I'll be wrong, but I think we're still in the middle of a fight.
I think time's up. We want to thank you for
right. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, and to everybody.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.